life is a play, right? We just made it into a game instead with a purpose, and then we continuously think about that purpose, and then we can't think about anything else, and that means we're always living in the future, right? Or in the past, for that matter, and then like we're not really here in the present. So it's kind of sad, right? Whereas if you're playing, it's a completely different story, right? Because then you're, you know, you're being as you were as a kid to some extent. That's why all kids are so happy, right? And then as you grow older, then society and expectations takes over. If you don't, you know, make the sacrifice and dedication to this, then it won't be a success. So that's why I always say you can do one project. You can't do 3 projects at the same time, because then all 3 are going to be equally bad. Babies are like startups, right? It's 5% cute and 95% cleaning up vomit and changing diapers, right? So
1, 2, 3, 4.
He would be special enough just because he's my neighbor, but once you know him a little more, you see that he's a true Renaissance man. He has all these amazing sides to him. So I've done in the past some really fun podcasts with him on psychedelics, but then he founded over 10 companies. He's one of those people that has been in the history of startups. He was at Y Combinator in Silicon Valley. He was all over the world with Rocket Internet, another classic as well, an iconic operation. And then that wasn't enough. So he decides to take over the airline industry. Very easy, and many have tried and many have failed, but he didn't. He launched AirHelp, which is now one of the biggest legal tech firms in the world. And what they do is they go after airlines when, for instance, you miss your flight. So that's Henrik for you. Is extremely rounded, and we talked a little bit about everything. Great talk with Philip as well, Nova student, that we went and we talked about from being an entrepreneur to his experience with spirituality, the impact of spirituality in the companies and in his personal life, being a dad, living abroad, who he likes to hire, and a lot of really cool stuff. Stay around, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we did.
So, for me, Henrik, you're like the true Renaissance man, and I think we really need that. You go from being in the army, being in Rocket Internet, which is like the military service all over again, launching extremely successful companies all over the world, living in many countries. You can speak about AI in one day. The same day you will go to the jungle and do an ayahuasca retreat for a month, being eaten by mosquitoes. You have a family, but I see you partying. You have like all these different sides to you. Who are you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Especially because, as you say, I'm wearing many hats. Right? So I think, that path through life has just taken me through many different areas and experiences. But yeah, no, I think, started out as a kid in Copenhagen. So I'm from Denmark, and born and raised there, but always knew I had a little bit more ambition than what a small country like Denmark, right, only 5 million people, would be able to offer me. So yeah, I was always looking outwards for new experiences, and I had a entrepreneurial bug very early on.
What was your initial entrepreneurial ambition, or what was success for you at that young age?
Yeah, so looking at your life like ahead and what do you want to become, right? I think early on I just wanted to be a zookeeper. That was my early ambitions until I was probably 10 or 12, and I thought, animals are great, but maybe it's not a life occupation. Well, it could be for some, but yeah, I wanted perhaps to experience something more, and then I started studying. And back then I was like, if you're on autopilot in your life, you go to school, you go to high school, you go to college study business. Thankfully I was good at concentrating, so I could get in at the one of the good degrees that then allowed me to study in Hong Kong and take my bachelor there, and also take a semester in New York. So my school years were actually a combination of travel and also learning about business.
So you studied business?
I studied business, and then I did a computer science as a master, but I did that back in Copenhagen. But after doing both bachelor and masters, I realized that it's not teaching me what I actually want to learn. So my years at school were not so exciting for me. It was exciting to travel and learn a lot of new people, but the content of what I was learning was mostly theory, and the connection to the practical world and what I wanted to build, and I have a very practical mindset, was not there. And typically because a lot of the universities and the professors also perhaps never ventured out into the real world, but remained in the university and was teaching their whole lives. And so I think that part I was missing going through university, and that's why afterwards I said more studies. I did my diplomas, so at least the world can see I'm able to go to school. But I wanted to prove something else, and that's when I started saying, okay, I need to do something within tech, because that was a big interest of mine, and also within business. And yeah, I had
what was the next step?
Yeah, so I'd spent some time in Silicon Valley working as a consultant for a Danish innovation hub. So that was many Scandinavian companies come to Silicon Valley to find out if they could work or partner with some of these big guys in the US. And I was facilitating those introductions and figuring out if there was anything, partnerships that could be made, right? So I had a little bit of exposure to Silicon Valley in the beginning. And then I knew, okay, I need to come back here because this is where all the exciting stuff is happening, right? So that was my study years, grooming me for what I wanted to do. And then my decision after that was to actually go join a company that was not doing so much tech, but that was mostly copying successful business models and then broadcasting them to the whole world. And that company was called Rocket Internet.
Very famous company.
A very famous company with three brothers leading it, the Zillmer brothers. And they were hardcore ambitious, but also very German in the sense of execution. And everything had to happen extremely fast and take as much risk as you could, right? So if you know a little bit about them, they started a copy of eBay that they quickly sold to eBay and earned 60 million. And this was like 9 months into the company, right? Imagine you're starting a company and 9 months later you're selling it for 60 million. And then they spend that money on branching into a handful of other companies, also copies of successful models out of the US. And then that was also became a success. They started Groupon in the rest of the world. So Groupon realizing, oh, these guys are experts in international expansion, whereas we don't know much about that. So actually, we give you the right to go out and start Groupon everywhere in the world. So that was the days, like when was that, 2005 to 2010, and Rocket did that partially good, partially bad. They burned their fingers in some countries. But then they decided...
They were a great school, actually. Like, I lived in Mexico, as you know, and in Mexico, I think they were one of the best entrepreneurial schools.
Oh, for sure.
Like, the seeds that came out and the startups that came out, some of the most successful startups that we have now actually came from ex-Rocket people.
Definitely. So that was also what I experienced, because I joined in 2010 and I went to Berlin for an interview. And the interview was fairly quick. I got to speak to the CFO of Rocket Internet. I got to speak to Oliver, and they said, "Yeah, come on board." But there was not really that much like curation or screening going on. It was basically just get in the van, right? And at the end of the day, I said, okay, maybe this is going to be exciting. I had some experience building web shops before, and a lot of what Rocket does is not very advanced. It's mostly e-commerce platforms.
So what did you do there?
Yeah, so I went to the interview. We were about like 30 people at the same time going through like the basics of what Rocket Internet was and the mission of the company. And then if you decide to say, okay, I'm down for it, then you went basically down to a basement where there was this tombola, or what do you call it, like a draft,
Yeah.
right? And then each one of us would go up and pick a number, and then on the slip of paper, it would be the assignment destination of which company you were supposed to start, right? And then I picked mine, and I got Sydney. I was like, hell yeah, I'll do Sydney, right? So I was on my way to do a copy of Zappos, the shoes and the clothes from the US, which they copied in Europe and named it Zalando.
Yeah.
And then they were going to do the same thing in all of Southeast Asia and Australia called Zalora. You see the three syllables, like it's always Zalando or Lazada, and they found out that that's the name. If you have those three syllables in whatever combination, your mind is more likely to remember it, right? So that's, very German mentality, right? What works? How do we convert? Not so much brand storytelling and that kind of stuff, right? So that was also the mentality. And in that room, 30 of us were sent everywhere, right? Some people were not as lucky and got Lagos, Nigeria, right? And the Middle East, which was also tough when it's fashion. But yeah, they sent us all over the world and as consultants from Rocket in Berlin. And that started my entrepreneurial journey, I would say. Up until that, I've been studying a lot. But then when I finally got to start my own company, then it wasn't my own company. It was, of course, Rocket Internet Project. But it was an opportunity to get a big pile of money and to start building a company from scratch. And that process is the same if you do it for investors or you do it for yourself. The first years, that's pretty much the same. And here, coming back to the comment about it.
I love, one of the articles that you have on your website that is like, do not start by fundraising.
Yeah.
And it's like, and here are the steps that you have to do. I sent that to my team because I think that's several years old. It's
most people who are founders, entrepreneurs coming to me for asking for advice, they always stand in the predicament that they can't really start before they have money.
Yeah.
That's always what the problem is. So I just need to raise some money and then I can start. And you really have to think of an investor in those situations. If you were to invest your money into something, wouldn't you always prefer seeing something with traction than just a thought or an idea, a PowerPoint where you have no real proof of it actually working out or not, right? So you really have to get to that point where you have something to show, right? And up until that point, you have to finance it with your own money or with your friends' money or with your family's money. And today you can get so far with very little money, right? So you can actually figure out if there's demand for a product with almost no money, right? But just being smart about it, figure out what the tools you can use today. So that's the biggest, I would say, one of the biggest, if not the biggest mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs do, that they think they have to start with fundraising. Fundraising begins maybe a year in when you've worked on it and you become a little bit of an expert in the area. And you know what to do to build the company further, right? So yeah, that's definitely not something that applies to Rocket Internet. So just it's not the same in that way.
I remember they were like not even share. They didn't have. They were hiring so much they didn't even have enough.
No. Yeah, I can tell you crazy stories, right? Like I was one of the first in Singapore. Within a year, we went from 5 people to 2,500 people. Right? Wow. In a year, like the amount of recruiting that has to happen across 10 countries, right? And mind you that the culture of Rocket is cutthroat. Yeah. So you had 25%, 30% leavers within the first 3 months. So we actually hired more than 3,000 people in a year, right? So you can see it's completely gun-ho, but with the, philosophy that, go as fast as possible, break as many things as you can do, but we're gonna, you're still gonna be hearing for it, but at least you will figure out what works as fast as possible, right? And that was the sense of urgency that was in Rocket, and that's the sense of urgency you need when you start your own company as well, right? Because you're on a timer, and that timer's going to run out at some point, and then you don't have any money, or won't get the resource you need to get further, right? So that was the same.
That article that you have mentions exactly like it's always emergency mode, and
Yeah, it is.
I found it I was reading it preparing for the interview with you, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I sent it to my team right away. I was like, guys, this is what, because we're launching a funeral service startup, and it was like, guys, do read this because this is exactly what we are going through right now. So pay attention. Now, we're going back to your story, but I would like to know what were the key factors that you believe made you successful. For sure, there's some luck, but what you see like as a success, the key factors for someone to be successful. Like if you're going to bet on an entrepreneur or someone to hire for a company, or what you think are those characteristics? Because especially if you hired so many people, you have a little bit that feeling.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's probably no like correct answer to it as like a profile or persona as you have to be in order to be successful. There's a lot of other factors involved in it, right? But I think looking back at my career as an entrepreneur, so both working for Rocket, starting AirHelp after Rocket, starting Room, another company within a completely different space. So here I have many different companies across many different industries, right? So how come I'm able to do it again? And I think the building blocks that I possess is that like I'm a hard worker. That's for sure. If you don't, make the sacrifice and dedication to this, then it won't be a success. So that's why I always say you can do one project. You can't do 3 projects at the same time, because then all 3 are going to be equally bad. Right? Like if you are to be successful, you need to really focus. But then reaching out to your network, finding out who knows someone, just to get them to hear our name before the interview is there. Have interviews with people who, the only other Danish person who ever gone through Y Combinator, and talk to him about what he did at the interview. So hard work, but preparation and figuring out, how can I sneak in somehow, right? And fake it until you make it. Actually, that works, especially in the startup world, right? Because you don't have anything, so you have to fake it, right? And that worked for us. And I think, as a red line throughout all the success we've achieved, then it's been, hard work, persistence, and then figuring out the way we can get in. And here it's like, if you don't accept no for an answer, but you're persistent, finding a way, then eventually you get what you want, right?
Yeah.
And that's, maybe a very rocket internet value, but it does work in when you start your company, right?
And so and circling back to Rocket. So you're at Rocket. What makes you leave Rocket?
Yeah, so after 2 years where I was already a veteran, because not a lot of people lasted long, I left because I said, okay, now I have learned everything I could here. I started 10 companies within Rocket, all within e-commerce. So it was plug and play at the end, right? So at that time I said, okay, now I need to start something of my own, because I feel I've learned what I needed to learn. And now I can.
And they were famous for screwing
founders. And they were famous for screwing founders, right? Because, salary was definitely attractive, but, a lot of people got co-founder titles, but very tiny percentages, right? Just so they would have the title on their resume. And that I call a little bit the fake entrepreneurs, because they were coming out from management consulting companies or Bain, McKinsey and all that. And this would look good on the resume, but then did they have the entrepreneurial skills to build something from scratch, the focus on product, the passion on product? No, not really. They could be inserted in any other company, and they would do the exact same job, right? So that was a different mentality, where I said, okay, this business is interesting, but I've always been a product manager of heart, right? So focusing on what the problem is and coming up with a solution to that problem, and doing the iteration of getting customer feedback and converting that into what the developer should be coding, getting it tested and getting it deployed. And that iteration, the faster you can do that, the better your product becomes, and the more you distance yourself from competitors, right? So that whole product world and product mindset, I loved, and I couldn't get, the space and resources and Rocket to work on that because it was not their strategy. You just don't invent the wheel again. Like, we're just going to copy it, right? And I said, okay, fair enough. Then it's not for me. And then I started my own thing, right? And AirHelp was one of the many ideas I was working on a beach in Bali.
Okay, so let's talk about AirHelp. I've heard first about AirHelp because it's one of those things that you're like a little bit like death in Texas. It's like airlines are going to suck, and they are delayed and they have issues, but there's nothing you can do about it. But then you did something about it. So can you tell us a little bit about AirHelp, where it is now, and then a little bit understanding like how it came to be?
AirHelp is actually the biggest law firm in the world today. If you measure it on how many legal actions are being taken. And we never wanted to become the biggest law firm in the world, but that's where we ended up. It's a big company today. It's active in 135 countries, actually. So a worldwide company helping air passengers get compensation if their flight is delayed or canceled. And that happens to about 1% of all flights. But of all the people who experience that, only about 85% doesn't know about their rights for compensation. So only 15% actually end up talking to the airline or reaching out to some people who can help them trying to get some compensation. So that was the problem that back 10 years ago, actually we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, said, okay, I'm definitely not the only one experiencing this. You probably heard from family or friends or colleagues also experiencing flight delays, right? That just suck. And you don't get anything typically. But when I started looking into it and trying to seek compensation for myself, I also quickly realized that was actually not the truth. And there was actually, money to be to get, but it was covered in red tape and very difficult, both online, offline communication methods with the airlines, right? Who generally never wanted to accept any claim, right? So it was just like this black hole, and the law and the consumer rights were there. So the good thoughts had been done and had been implemented, but there was no enforcement, which was interesting to me because I saw something that actually were applicable to everyone who were traveling, right? So if you're flying, but no one knew about it, and for the one who knew about it, there was no service to actually make it easy, right? So coming from business background, tech background, a family full of pilots and lawyers, then I kind of had the cocktail where I could say, okay, this is traditional legal work, litigation, but I'm going to use tech and robots, rule engines, machine learning to build a system that can facilitate all these hundreds, now millions of claims for customers, where we can actually help even if the value of the claim is very small. And that was the groundbreaking thing that we actually did. And I think the reason is we became the biggest law firm in the world, because we, for the first time, said, okay, now we're going to help all the small claims, so like high volume but low value. And this whole segment of a legal industry didn't exist before, right? Because no lawyer will touch a claim for €100, right?
And this was totally like David and Goliath. It's like, I imagine, I don't know, when you're starting this, I would love to hear the comments, because it's like, this has always been like this. These guys are monsters. They have so much money. And they did try to fight you back in sanctions.
I can tell you the first 2 years, we were not making any revenue, right? No, not a single claim was paid out. right? Like, why would like these airlines pay out some, small little company who's, asking kindly if they can pay compensation to their customer? Like they didn't care, right? So we were just left for 2 years without any. Like, we were good at getting customers, which was fun because we were traveling around Europe, to airports, buying cheap tickets to get on the other side of security. And then we were just waiting there for the flights to be delayed or to come in late, right? And then that was where we then handed them our business cards and told people, because, they weren't being told by the staff of the airlines, right? So that was, again, coming back to how you have to be a hacker a little bit. In our case, this was our boots on the ground strategy. And that was where we, for the very little money, got the first, I think, 3,000 passengers to reach out to us and say, hey, I need help with my flight delay, right? And then we got the first claims, but airlines didn't want to pay out, and not before we had gathered enough attention in the media and also were able to build a story of traction, not of revenue. Then investors said, okay, we would like to invest. One of those investors being Y Combinator, right? And when
so you have a lot of moving pieces that are very interesting. So you launch a company.
Yeah.
You do like growth hacking. You get the clients.
Yeah.
But then you weren't delivering the service to the clients because it
was not a successful product.
So you were great at usually what's hard to do is like get the clients, but then the product is actually not working.
It's not working now.
So first thing, what kept you going?
Yeah.
Because at that point you're like, I'm done. It's like, it comes through your mind. I'm sure like maybe I'm on the wrong track, or what kept you going? And then how you do the turnaround on that.
Yeah. I think maybe the third skill to have as an entrepreneur is being stubborn. Right. And I think we also had that, almost ridiculous belief in yourself, right? And in the belief that this product has to exist. It's evident that it has to exist because there's so many other people experiencing the same problem, right? So we thought, no, like this, there must be an existence for us. But we had to crack, the case first and figure out how do we get airlines who don't want to pay the compensation to actually pay us, right? And that's where AirHelp then, became the legal part of it, right? Because we realized that, and that was an eye-opener for me, because if you don't work with law normally, then you tend to think that law is, keeping society intact, but law isn't actually law before you go to court and you have a judge who, decides how the law should be interpreted. And especially in the commercial world, where there's a lot of interest and a lot of money at stake, that can be contested, right? And that's where you end up with all these huge cases, which we did, right? We had to take a lot of money and put it into like legal fights, which is highly unusual for a startup, right? Typically, that's what stuff you don't want to deal with because it's preventing you from building a product and service. But this was our product and service, right? We had to prove to all the airlines in the world that if they reject our claim or don't pay out, we're going to take them to court and we're going to win because the law is on our side. And then they're going to cover our cost as well. And we're going to seek pain and suffering and damages and all that stuff. So it ended up being more expensive for them. And that was, but it had to be done for them to slowly but surely see, okay, we might be able to reject all the passengers' claims, but if we get a claim from AirHelp, then we know they're going to come after us afterwards in court, right? And once we did that, in I think 2-3 years in, we started, building robots to prepare all the claims, send them to court, also submission into some countries have that online, that resulted in hundreds of thousands of claims already back then. So at some point in the beginning, AirHelp constituted about 10% of all small claims cases in Europe's city courts. 10%. Imagine the expense.
You're getting on everyone's nerves, like on the government and the Justice Department, on airlines.
Yeah, because of course the city halls were pissed because this was taking up so many resources and people have to pay for that. But on the other hand, and the airlines of course hated it too because they would have to go to court, right? But what happened in most of the cases is, of course, that the airlines realize that they're not going to win this, and then they offer a settlement. And then we negotiate a settlement on behalf of our customer, and they get the compensation. So in the beginning, everything had to go through court. Today, 10 years later, it's completely different. Right now, most of the cases we send, unless it's edge cases or we disagree on what actually happened, then the airline will pay out to us automatically. So much more smooth. But that was the whole period where we basically had to break down the wall and fight our way through against these humongous players, right? Like airlines are gigantic compared to us, right?
Did you have co-founders?
Yeah, so we were three guys. So me and Nicholas and Greg. Greg being the CTO from South Africa, and Nicholas, a friend of mine from back in the day in Denmark, so also from Copenhagen. And we started everything in Bali. After Rocket, I needed to have my feet in the sand for a little bit. And that was a perfect place. And I would recommend that to anyone who wants to start a company. If you have only a certain runway, then that runway will be longer. And,
if you're in Bali.
If you're in Bali or if you're in Asia, and there's many other beautiful places where you don't necessarily need to pay rent every month for a co-working space. Right?
Were you remote at the time?
Yeah, all remote. So AirHelp.
Until today, you're remote?
AirHelp was 100% born global. So we would be sitting in the beginning in Bali. Our developers would be in Eastern Europe, or we would have support in Bangladesh. We would have our graphical design in Romania. We would have our sales team in the US and sales representative all over Europe. So those are the guys who are getting partnerships through online travel agents and travel management companies and stuff like that. So like there's no point in the history of AirHelp where we have all sat down in the same office every day and gone to work. It never existed.
Why did you decide like this? Like to split it up?
Yeah, because, I think also like a takeaway from Rocket was that Rocket was a worldwide, company and everyone was just measured on performance, not necessarily if they came to the office every day, right? And since we were always traveling, I was working mostly on my computer and on Skype and Slack and those tools. And that was equally good to, starting your own company afterwards, like to be able to communicate with everyone instantly, right? And you don't have to travel back and forth, which you, by the way, also can't afford when you're a startup, right? So, and then, you can't afford great, AAA senior developers in the US or in Germany in the beginning, right? Then you can get a long way with some really good engineers out of Poland, which was what we did, but also had in other countries. And now today that they're actually almost as good as rest of Europe, right? So that we like really used in the beginning to make like all those like freelancer.com platforms. Like our logo at AirHelp, the cost us €25. The logo of AirHelp the first 7 years, right, was €25 on freelancer.com.
Yeah.
And they was even made incorrectly, but it didn't matter. It was just, let's put something on there. Let's see if it works. We can change it and stay for 7 years. And there's a lot of those stories, right? Where, for very little, we achieved a lot. But yeah, that was the Bali lifestyle. We stayed in Thailand for 6 months.
Were the founders together?
The founders were together. So it was us three building the first app, building the first website. It was fantastic, right? We worked hard, but the breaks were, kite surfing or going to the beach and, chilling. So it was how we always wanted to work, right? And that was kind of the dream. And that's usually also even though there's, also the time where you don't have a lot of money, right? And you also burning your own money. So it's a little bit of a, risky time in your life, right? But it was also one of the best. Right, it was so much fun, and you were working on your own project, bringing that to life. So it didn't really matter that you didn't have, a lot of money, and you were taking big risks. So yeah, after that, then we applied to Y Combinator, and Y Combinator invited us over for an interview, and we spent the last of our runway on flights to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And this was like on a Thursday, and I have a picture of me on the beach, like with the email saying we've been invited to an interview. on Monday we're in San Francisco doing a 10-minute partner round where there's like hundreds of companies right back then also, and you were then being interviewed by the smartest people in Silicon Valley, right? So the founder of Gmail was there, right? Paul Buchheit. We had the founder of Twitch also there, Justin Kahn. We had Michael Siebel. We had Sam Altman, who's now doing ChatGPT, right? So he was there. Paul Graham was the president at the time. Did Netscape. So all these really, really smart people interviewing you, basically toasting you, roasting you for 10 minutes, right? So after 10 minutes, you walk out, it's like, wow, that was a waste of time, right? Because, they find your weaknesses instantly, right? And then they just dig, and then you come out and think it was horrible. But, so they typically ask you, do you have a phone number? And what's your email, right? And if we email you, it means that you're out or we don't invest. And if we call you, then you're in, right? And we went to a bar nearby and waited, and surely enough, an email came in, and then it asked for our phone number because they didn't have our phone number. And then they called us up and said, okay, we decided we would like to invest in AirHelp. And that was, of course, a game changer for our company, right? So,
but how do you prepare for such an interview? That it's going to be.
Yeah, so that was also the thing that I've done a lot of prep interviews now for other companies afterwards who wanted to go in on my company. And I even wrote some blog posts about it too. And there's things you can do to prep for it that you need to know what you need to answer. But you will always be caught off guard in many things where, you can't bullshit them, right? Yeah. Like you might be a great salesperson and say, no, we're going to fix that and fix that. It's like, but they know how many lines of code that's going to be, right? Or how complex it is, or what, because they've all been through the journey themselves, right? And in that Y company, you realize that the bigger the success, the bigger the shit show. Those two things are kind of proportional to each other, right? And that goes for every company. And you hear it again and again and again from all the founders telling you about it, right?
It's like a sausage. It's round on the outside. You know the amount of shit that goes
and it's for all of them, right? For Airbnb, for Facebook, for all of them. There's no easy path, right? So you realize that there. And I think they're looking in the beginning mostly for the team. Because the number one reason for companies to split up or startups to fail is founder dispute. Mm-hmm. And they have statistics on all that, right?
How did you get along with your...
Very well. So Nico and I, of course, both same culture, worked together before, so that was easy. He did all marketing and hardcore guerrilla tactics, going to the airports, going a lot of press, because we had a David versus Goliath story.
Yeah.
So it was interesting for a lot of press to, summer season, here's your rights, right? Bam, all over the place for free. Mm-hmm. And that's marketing you can't even buy that marketing. Mm-hmm. Like if the news actually talks about you and like in a good way, you can't buy that marketing. So he did that. Greg was the CTO, and we had a great team. But also what you realize when you start a company is that you all have certain times in the company, and either you're able to develop as the company develops, you develop personally as well. Mm-hmm. And some people can do that, some people can't do that. And then you also have the other factor that maybe you reach a point where as the company develops, you also change the roles that you have in the company. And then maybe people like that, find it exciting, or some people don't like it and rather want to do what they did before. So, for example, our CTO, when we got to about 25 people in the tech team, he was saying, well, now I'm spending all my time on admin, managing, HR. That's not what I wanted to do. I rather want to sit and code and build products like that.
You get a good coder that becomes a bad project manager.
Yeah, exactly. So that for him was a stop and say, no, I don't want to be the CTO anymore. And then we found a new CTO, right? And the same goes for marketing. Marketing in the beginning is very much guerrilla tactics, but over time, as the company grows, and also when you start spending more and more money on marketing, then it's more so an Excel sheet right, than it is to figure out what the next campaign should be and style and that kind of stuff. Because then you're spending millions and just, figuring out with data how conversion can be 0.5% better using these channels instead of that channels. Well, that's an Excel exercise, and then you're constantly just sitting there. So it's almost like a data management team doing online marketing, right, or performance marketing.
Henrik, I have right now an invitation to you, which is if you would come and tell us that the next course here at Nova, would you teach a class about AirHelp and your experience?
I have so much to tell, right? So one day I'll write a book.
To put it on the podcast. Let's start with that. And I'd love to put the class on the podcast.
And also because I believe you go through every part of a company when you build a company. There's every section because in the beginning you are only 3 people, right? And everything has to be pushed down the road at the same time. So you have to just put on all the hats at the same time and figure out what works, right? And that you can't also learn in school. No, as I said, right?
I think I was telling to someone in my team now, it's like you have no idea the MBA you're getting now. Yeah. It's like you're getting all the experience.
So after 7 years, I was checking in with myself and saying, okay, is there someone else who can do that better, running an 800-person company now than me? And if there is, then it actually makes more sense for me as the biggest shareholder to have another person run it, because then it's also a better outcome for myself, right? So not only will I, have a better economic outcome, but I'll also be able to start building new companies or focus on other things. Mm-hmm. So that was my decision back then.
So you took a sabbatical?
I didn't take a sabbatical. I went straight into becoming the chairman of the board. So before I had chairman and also CEO, and then we flipped it. So the chairman actually went in and became the CEO. Then I became the chairman.
Still the chairman?
I'm still the chairman, yeah. So it was not really that tough of a decision in the end, because the chairman had been an angel investor for the company since year 2. So he knew everything about the company. And we were tag teaming.
He was the CEO of Huffington.
So a fantastic guy to come in who knew the stage of 10 to 20 years, right? And not the 0 to 10 years, which was where I feel I had my best, right? So he could come in and take the company to the next stage, right? So that was like perfect. I can lean back. I'm in the board. I can help as I usually did. And that was 3 months before COVID.
No more travel.
No, so I got a sabbatical in. We took my wife and we traveled around the world, and we had a great trip. Could have been longer, but then when this whole pandemic started, then we had to rush back to Europe, and then I had to go into work mode as well, because then when you have a company that loses pretty much 80-90% of revenue from one quarter to the next, then you have to act fast, real fast, right? And at that time, no one knew when it was going to end. So trying to convince investors to put in more money without any form of certainty that travel was actually going to be back in 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, that was extremely difficult. So I would say, even though I took, I stepped aside and a new CEO came in, I was working full time when I got back to trying to save the company. And that took like another 12 months before we were certain that the company were going to survive.
But you started several projects.
Yeah.
You started.
Yeah.
I saw you have to focus on one.
Yeah. So, but that actually I still was able to manifest because like Room, for example, which is phone booths, meeting rooms, that came to be because AirHelp was moving office every 6 months because we were outgrowing the space. Same with Rocket Internet, outgrowing the space, had to move every 6 months. And every time we had to build new meeting rooms, build new phone booths because, people needed privacy to call, right? So that was a clear problem. And me as an entrepreneur, seeing a problem, saying, okay, it makes no sense that there's no like IKEA option for these booths because it's fairly easy to install and it solves the problem, right? So that became so evident that I had to do it. So it's usually the point where I look at something, and then when it becomes so no brainer. Then I have to do something because else I can't, sit still. I can't sit on it, right?
Yeah.
Because the world needs it and it's feasible. You can actually do it. And we found out it was possible. We could produce it, ship it, flat package. People could assemble the phone booths themselves. And we got room.com, great domain. And then after 2 years, I stepped aside from that too. New CEO, new CMO, and the team continued. So I was only involved in the beginning with the fun idea validation phase, also getting the first investment into the company. And then they were off. And also, it wasn't great to be CEO in two companies at the same time, I can tell you.
How was it for you to run two companies at the same time, but then stepping back?
Yeah. So Room, I stepped back actually before I did step back from AirHelp. So Room was quite independent quite quickly, which was completely different than AirHelp, right? Because AirHelp took 3 years before we really made money to sustain a company, whereas Room was product market fit within a year, right? And then it just went extremely fast after that. So that was the reason why I could kind of let it go sooner, whereas AirHelp still, we were hardware is one thing, but what we were building in AirHelp was quite advanced. So it might not seem advanced from the outside because it's just paperwork and claims, but it's extremely advanced when you have to put in regulations from all over the world with different legislations or court systems, depending on where people live, the airlines, you have weather data, you have airport data. So it's a monster of a web form that makes it look simple, right? So
now we're going to do the twists.
Yeah.
And we are definitely going to do another podcast on the entrepreneurial. But something that fascinates me about you is that then you have all these other sides to you. So I'm going to start with a question we were talking about before, which and then go a little bit more into your spiritual experience. But just to a little bit round up the entrepreneurial experience, can you create great companies without being a little bit very tough, in some cases, an asshole? Because if you look at what people speak about, Bill Gates, about Elon Musk, about all these entrepreneurs, Steve Jobs, is like, oh, they were assholes. Yeah, but they created Travis Kalanick, Uber. It's like, how are you going to disrupt an industry that is basically a mafia? Protected in every single way, from unions to legislation to crime to everything. Can you actually disrupt an industry if you're not a little bit tough and persistent, and that comes with other traits? Now, were you an asshole at the time? Did you change? Can you create these type of companies without being really
it's a fantastic question. Could speak about it for days, I think. And part of the reason why and I haven't found the answer yet, right? I can look at it from personal experience, right? And when you ask me, have I been an asshole at times? I said, for sure, for sure I have, right? And I don't think I'm an asshole all the time. I think if you ask all the people I work with, then they would probably say I was tough and hard and expected a lot, right? But I was also fair, right? And I was also seeing the good in every person's intention. But I was always prioritizing the company's needs over the employees' needs, right? And that was a very rocket thing to do, and also my time in the army. But that was how I started the company. That balance can be better, I would say. But I always looked at, what does the company need in order to be successful, right? And then people had to adjust to that, right? Whereas many people probably look at the people and what makes the employees happy, because if the employees are happy, the company will be happy, the customers will be happy. And that's partly also true. So you really have to find a balance. But I was very focused in the early years about the company needed to survive, and a lot of people, probably thought that this was a little bit too cynical and maybe not very friendly. But that again, like, so you could be stamped as an asshole in those years. I could have done it differently. I would say now in my second company, or like my third or fourth company, I'll be a lot less strict in that sense, and a lot more focused on just what work needs to be done, right? So not necessarily like hammering through, but be more conscious about how you do it, how you communicate, and what to work on, right? I think a lot of the mistakes you make in the beginning, I'm not going to make these mistakes, but because I made those mistakes, a lot of time and efforts and resources and people were, working their ass off to figure that out, right? And I think that you can save yourself from in the next attempts, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure, I've been called an asshole, not once but twice.
It's part.
Yeah.
It's part of the game. When I see like companies that they're like, oh, we are a startup, but they are starting by doing the Google offices. I was like, actually, guys, Google, the story is that they started in the garage.
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't start having like all these cuddle puddles and chefs.
And if you look at
that's the consequence of being successful.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not the reason.
No. And if you look at Steve Jobs, like why did Apple become every single like detail on every product needed to be carefully thought through and better than the competition, right? And if it didn't make sense, then it had to be changed, right? And imagine all the dialogue he's had with his developers, right? Where he would have to force his will through, regardless of their opinion, not only once but thousands of times, right? To get to that point of perfection. And that, many times I've been in the same chair, and it doesn't need to be tech. It could be sales. It could be product. It could be finance, right? Where, you have to force your way through, right? And say, hey, you need to trust me this time again, as you have trusted me 10 times before, right? And we're still here, right? Even though you think it should be done differently, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to own it if you also make mistakes. So that's, I think, maybe the difference between an asshole. If I made a mistake, I'll be the first one to say, fuck, I'm sorry, that was my mistake. And I would probably also be the first one to, point fingers at myself for making it, right? So entrepreneurs are very hard on themselves. But yeah, I think, today I would probably do it a little bit less cutthroat, more conscious, and make sure that people
conscious. What's consciousness? What's spirituality for you? Because you have this all other side that at the same time you're developing companies, you're going and developing yourself as a human being.
Yeah.
And there's a big transition. Can you tell us, I'd say, first of all, what's spirituality for you? And tell us a bit about your path of spirituality and what came along.
Also a 2-day answer, I think. So what is spirituality to me? I think that's a good question, but I think it's your inner connection with your spirit, right? And that sounds very flimsy, but if you, up until a certain point in your life, never really met your spirit, right? And then for the first time you meet your spirit. Oh, there's a spirit. I have a spirit. I didn't even know. I have a soul.
When did you see it and how?
So for me, and that was maybe connected to the transition out of the companies, right? Because I was like looking for the next step, right? What am I supposed to do? So, I built these companies and I'm like, how do I progress further in life, right? Because I was starting to get diminishing returns perhaps on what I was doing. So then through also Silicon Valley, I started to talk to people, and here it was starting to slowly come up that you could start going on retreats, and they were integrating different kinds of psychedelics. You can see Steve Jobs already did it back in the 70s with LSD, but California and Silicon Valley really upped the game in that they saw a lot of these things as supplements that could help you, shortcut 10 years of your personal development by either doing plant medicines and going to Peru or doing it in California. So that was kind of when I first heard about it, and that got me curious. So it was I was coming into it from a business perspective, saying, okay, all these CEOs are also doing it, right? Maybe a little bit FOMO, but
which year was it?
This was in 2013, 2014, yeah. But then I didn't do my first trip to Peru before 2016.
Okay.
And if you were to answer your question, when did I meet my soul for the first time? That was in Peru in 2016. So that was a retreat, Entrepreneur's Awakening, it was called. Quite spot on. It sounds maybe a little bit taggy, corny, but it wasn't. It was really top quality people and facilitators, and spending 12 days in the mountains of Pisac in Peru, in the Sacred Valley of the Incas. So, like, just a beautiful location. And then that was a ayahuasca retreat, and San Pedro retreat was another type of
San Pedro is a cactus.
So as the indigenous down there had been practicing for tens of thousands of years with this medicine, then I was going down there to see how that could benefit me, because a lot of the people I've been talking to were coming back with great stories to tell, but also a different look in their eye, right? So I was going down there to say, how can that help me? How can it help my company, right? And I, talking about being an asshole, some of the parts I didn't like about myself was that maybe I can be more empathetic, maybe sympathetic, maybe I can always see the person before I necessarily see the performance, right? Because remember, if I'm always looking at what the company needs, then I neglect what the employee needs, right? So I wanted to change a little bit my perspective and perhaps like widen my understanding. And I also was observing or acknowledging the fact that if you are in an entrepreneurial mindset and world, it's a very harsh environment to be in. It's a very male-dominated environment, unfortunately. But it's a dog eat cat eat mouse thing where you have to compete with a lot of people who are very eager to make sure that you're not going to win, right? So it's a tough environment, and that kind of makes you tough, right? And it also blocks a little bit your heart in certain ways, that you're always in this cutthroat. You have to fight to survive mode. And I, after 7 years in Rocket 2, said, okay, I need to maybe come back to source and figure out who I am and see if I can remove some of these walls and become more maybe friendly, maybe more empathetic, like the feminine values, not the male values, right? So connecting to that side of myself. So that was my intentions going down there.
And then the result?
And the result, like I would say, it like that medicine has the power to change your life. So that's why I say sometimes it's a one-way ticket. And for me, it was a one-way ticket. Like I came back a different person, because when you meet your soul for the first time and like go beyond what's just flesh and body, and you see that or you understand it as if it's real, then you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Right. So then, like if you realize that, okay, if everything here is like that or true, and I've never known about it, then everything else I've been told might also just be not as I thought it was. Right. So it changed your perspective completely. So my mind exploded in 1,000 ways, and after that, I started looking at my life differently. I started looking at my company differently. So all my relations in my life also changed after that. And that was the seeds to starting to actually exit the companies in an operational sense, and know that I'm probably going to have my focus on the early years of any startup, because that's where I find it most interesting. But going on and continuing running large operations or organizations, that isn't me.
So you understood more who you were, and became more honest with yourself.
Yeah. So I went there saying, how can I improve the company? And I come out, and the irony is that, a lot of people do that. But what they then come out with is, how can I be a better person, or how can I get rid of all the things that are just not making sense anymore, right? That becomes very evident, right? Where it can be blurry. But here, in the use of psychedelics, you can actually see that very clearly, right?
Was there a contrast between, or a conflict between how you were raised and how you educated yourself as well. And
Yeah.
then you have, well, Silicon Valley was already trying out these things. But you're in a corporate world at a certain point.
Yeah.
You're a successful guy on the male energy, on like really strong.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there's this thing that a lot of people call a drug. And drugs, especially for our age, drugs are associated with junkies and all these negative connotation. And I was just reading Elon Musk's biography, and it's like the guy goes on Joe Rogan, smokes a joint, and then all hell breaks loose. How is this conflict for you when this happens? It's like, okay, I've went through this psychedelic experience, changes my perspective of things. And now I come to a world that is almost the opposite of what I've seen there. How do you integrate these experiences? And you also have fiduciary duties to your investors and to your employees and everyone. It's like, how do all these things come together? Because I think it's quite a shocking experience with the business world.
And in many ways, it's not compatible either. Like, you have to make some adjustments. I don't know, maybe you can repeat the question in terms of like what exactly.
How'd you bring together
the two worlds?
The two worlds. And how do you, especially when you come to the business world and you're bringing this experience, how do you integrate it into your business?
Okay, I see. So in my concrete example, I took what I learned there and went back to AirHelp, and then started a completely different HR setup, an HR team. Up until that point, that hadn't really been a focus of ours. And we then started building career plans. We made upgrades to the offices, so we actually had activities there. We did like yoga and breath work, stuff like that, which you typically don't see in large corporations, right? And started changing more on the spectrum towards what can we do for our employees and not necessarily what the employees can do for the company. So you see that was the development that we came from, where it's all about survival in the company is first before everything else, to going towards a living, breathing organization where we could attract people to come and work and people would be happy. Because if you can't create a great environment for people to work and be excited about, the organization's not going to last, right? Then it's just going to die at some point. So we needed to change. And I think the psychedelics, for me, boosted that change. And that was the clear difference when before and after, where I could see, okay, like this is what we need to prioritize now for us to have a healthy organization. So we made a lot of investments in that. And I believe that AirHelp became, like we also measured that, but AirHelp became a very attractive place to work. And one of the things that makes me the most happy today is all the employees in the past that worked for AirHelp then went to other companies, and everyone came back and said, you know what, like it was tough at AirHelp, but it was the best time I had. And now I realize in these other companies that, it's boring, it's stiff, I can't get anything through, it takes ages to get stuff done. Right, so they actually missed the time and said they were so happy. So just like Rocket in a way, maybe that was different, but for AirHelp, where you train a lot of new entrepreneurs and their mindset, right? So I think that the psychedelic trip back then, and I've integrated it in my life on a more regular basis since then. But that started the transition from a startup to a larger organization. And where our priorities shifted a little bit in terms of making our employees happy.
And you go into also a different life stage as well. No? You go into having a family, buying a farm, buying a tractor,
becoming a Portuguese farmer,
moving to Portugal, getting married.
I think, I always explain it as, you climb the first mountain of fame or fortune, right? You need to prove to the world who you are, what you can do. And there's an egoistic, driving force in all of us to be better, to be, wealthier, to be more successful, whatever the parameters of success is today in our society, right? And that's a great driver, right? But once you then reach the peak of that mountain, or not necessarily need to peak, but at some point you realize, oh, yes, now I have that perhaps, right? But is that actually making me happier as a person, right? And then you start changing your perspective, saying, okay, if it's not making me happier, why am I then continue to do it, right? And that's when you descend from the first mountain, and that's when you start your journey on the second mountain. And the second mountain is more about fulfillment, right? What makes you happy, right? So you're optimizing for happiness and maybe health, and you're not optimizing for fame and recognition.
What makes you happy?
Fortune.
What makes you fulfilled?
Yeah, so that's also changes over time, right? But I would say in the last 3 years, I've been very happy that I wasn't operationally involved in the company because it was very tough, right? So I had lucky that I had someone else to take that part of the journey, and then I loved that I was able to travel, or at least we got some travel in. We could settle down, beautiful country, have time to get kids. Which is probably one of the biggest investments you can make in life, right? And not having to balance a startup or a company, kids, moving to a new country, all these things at the same time, because then I wouldn't have enjoyed it, right? Because you would, as I said, you need to focus, right? And if you're doing 10 things at the same time, you're equally bad at all of them, right? And that is something that's given a lot of fulfillment. But I also know now, after taking a break, 3 years in, that I'm gonna come back to my entrepreneurial roots and product development roots, and start figuring out what other problems that are so evident needs to be solved, and then I'm gonna go in again, right? But
you already have the new idea, or
I have still ideas a dime a dozen, right? Success lies in execution. So I always have ideas, but it's more figuring out slowly what's happening within the industry. Why is it not happening? Why is this product service not there? Right? And becoming an expert within the industry. And then once you realize everything's in place, then I'm going to do it. I haven't reached that point yet. So
now at AirHelp, you were looking into machine learning, AI, I would guess. I imagine it's probably something that you've been looking into.
Yeah, so once we build that whole system, right, then you realize what you can do with robots, right? And how you can apply robots to many different things in society, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be consumer rights, right? It can be anything, right? So tomorrow I could go in any insurance company and cut 30% of their costs just by automating a great deal of their claim process, because that's what we've been doing, right? So, claim management sounds extremely boring, but that was kind of where we ended up, that we had to build this system, right? So you can use that for that. You can use it for banking. You can, everywhere there's admin work or paper crunching, then you can build robots around it and automate it. And we're still only in the very infancy of this, even though we think, it's all being automated. Yeah, but it can be automated to a much greater extent, right? So we today in AirHelp probably around 60% fully automated. So we still have 40% to automate, but some of that is depending on local court systems and languages and actual lawyers having to look at it. But we'll get to 80-85% automation within the next 5 years. So this is something, when you look at other industries, the public sector for that matter, we're still very, very small amount of paperwork is fully automated.
I'm doing funerals.
And funeral homes.
Funeral homes are
that's a good one.
The 50s.
Yeah.
50s, 1850s, not even 1950s.
Yeah.
It's
just for funeral homes, there's probably a lot there where, are you also burying the person, the online person of that person?
We're doing it.
Right? So I remember a company once called Dead Social. So that one where you signed up at Dead Social, gave them your login information, everything. And then basically you gave them full rights to close down everything at a certain time. But until that point, you could still, schedule posts, right? So after you were dead, then for years you could have posts coming, from you as if you were still there.
Right? Call it the afterlife concierge.
Okay, afterlife concierge, yeah. And there will be so much presence there that you also have to take that into consideration, right? But yeah, just for dead social or for funeral homes, there's so many other like ways we could also say goodbye, right? That they could facilitate, but it's a very old school way of going about it, right? And it's usually word of mouth, and we used this guy and he was good, and it's a sad time, right? But you could have many different like services on top of that. See, now my entrepreneurial mind is like continuously going on.
We're starting to look into blockchain, metaverse.
Or you could, and funerals are expensive, right? What about putting in a funeral insurance, right? You pay $5 a month.
We're launching it.
You launch it, okay, yeah. So like on and on and on, right? But then all these features I just mentioned, you think you can start them in 1 year, right? Like in 5 to 7 years, you have the full palette, right? Yeah. Because you've made a lot of mistakes up until that point. And
the vision is easy. The problem is the execution.
And also some of the things you think, that the customers want, and then you realize, no, they actually never wanted it.
Right? Yeah. It looks so cool. Yeah, amazing. And you do like client research, and it's like, of course I'm going to use it. And then it's like, okay, launch it. Why nobody uses it? Well, because it's competing against 50 other things people have to do.
That's probably so. Like working hard, right, and then being a hacker of some sort. But then I think the third one is that, like, you have to, I think that's the three most important qualities of an entrepreneur.
Now, let me ask you a couple of final questions, and there's definitely a second podcast to be done here.
Yeah.
And the third or fourth. You have, I'll do it in 3 parts. What is the advice you would give to your 20-year-old self when you were in college? Then you have young kids, considering everything that's changing. How are you educating them to face the reality that you think and believe they will be facing?
Yeah.
And for college students like we have here at Nova, what would you tell them? So what would you have done differently?
Yeah.
How are you preparing your kids to face the new reality?
Yeah.
And current students that are in the market?
What kind of skills should they have for the future?
Yeah, so it's always a tough question, because I keep saying that the real education as an entrepreneur comes after you leave school, not in school, right? So it's very difficult to teach entrepreneurship at in school, right?
Would you go to school again, or
so in hindsight, I would probably not have taken like a master's, maybe the bachelor, yes, because it gave me some other international experience, and I was exposed to other people, and that can then help you on your way. But I wouldn't put so much emphasis on it, meaning I would try to learn. The most important thing about school is group work, learning how to work with other people, and to your analytical skills. Right? Then you can say also writing, English and that kind of stuff. But your analytical skills is also very important, because that's what you're going to use afterwards. The actual content of it all, maybe you remember 10%, and that's what you use afterwards. But mostly there's no book that can make you an expert within air passenger rights, in my case, right, and legal system across the world, and like all that stuff I had to learn myself, right. So I think schools becomes more of a kind of a grooming place, perhaps, where we're also personally being developed, and we learn how to analyze things, research things, and that's the tools we need afterwards. But if you already know early in life that I want to do this, then I would not postpone it with school, right? Because if you are not going for a corporate career, you're not going to be using your resume that at all, right? Because if you start creating your own job and figure out this is what I want to do, it's going to be very difficult for you to go into a corporation afterwards and live that life. Because it's tough to go back. I would take what I would know I could use later, and I would tell my kids that too. And then I would also make them understand that most of the information they can get is already available to them online, so they don't need to necessarily go to school for that. But if they can go to school and maybe with more focus on practicalities and listening to people with experience, hopefully I can be part of that now and contribute to it. Then I think it's good learnings. But yeah, I wouldn't be so strict on it later, right? And like we always say, oh, you have to get a diploma, you have to get a degree, and then you can get a job afterwards. Yeah, but like the world's different today, right? Like you can create your own job. There's so many ways you can go. So we need to stop thinking about it, that cookie cutter approach. There's so many different paths to success, whatever success, how define success for yourself, right? So that would be my recommendation, to definitely tell them to follow their heart. If I am in the fortunate position to maybe give them the ability to work on a project where they don't have to worry about going out and finding money, but they can actually, for a small budget, just play around, right? Mm-hmm. Play around, see where it brings them. And if that then sparks a curiosity, interest, then that will automatically take over. And then they will, find it so exciting that they are building their own career, basically, right? It can also be that now that dad is an entrepreneur, then my daughter's going to be a doctor and my son is going to be a lawyer, right? Who knows? It's the pendulum usually swings, in one way and then the other. But I would recommend them to don't necessarily look at their career or path to be the cookie cutter approach that society sometimes presented as, right? Like there's so many more opportunities and access.
The university should be more like a playground to like test things.
For sure, right?
Try things.
Yeah, like why? Like life is a play, right? We just made it into a game instead with a purpose, and then we continuously think about that purpose, and then we can't think about anything else, and that means we're always living in the future, right? Or in the past, for that matter, and then like we're not really here in the present. So it's kind of sad, right? Whereas if you're playing, it's a completely different story, right? Because then you're being as you were as a kid to some extent. That's why all kids are so happy, right? And then as you grow older, then society and expectations takes over, right? And it goes like that. But yeah, I think play is important, and that's really what it is. Like you are doing stuff that no one perhaps thinks that is possible. And if you're not there, it's definitely no one's gonna like bring it out, right? So you have to be the one who starts the game or starts the play.
And Henrik, as a conclusion, what's exciting you now? What's, if you're looking in the next year? Yeah. What's exciting you now?
Yeah, so I think what has been exciting in the last 3 years, while I've not been active, I've also been advising. So I've talked to many entrepreneurs and I've been in many boards. So that is a way I can give back. And that I actually take a lot of joy in, because I can see where they are. I know what they shouldn't be doing or what they should do, and I can come with those recommendations. So that has been exciting. But I also know it's not something I'm going to do the rest of my life, right? Like I really want to get back to like building cool shit, and that's what I am excited about today. And it doesn't necessarily need to be classical business. I'm also looking at other projects now, so like trying to be more creative. Because I was creative back, I've always been creative, but I'll say I was working more on my creative side when I was going through college. I was doing stand-up comedy. I was doing like many.
That's a new.
Yeah, so that was another hat I wore, because I love being on stage and love cracking jokes, making people laugh, right? So that part of me is saying, okay, like why don't I combine that with business and figure out some model that could work on this area, right? Doesn't necessarily need to be that, but it could be something else within the creative space. So I don't like my goal is no longer how can I make the most money. It's almost to the extent, and it sounds arrogant, but I know how to make the most money, right? But like do I want to sell insurance the next 10 years, right? How's that going to change the world, right? Like, am I going to be happier for that? Probably not, right? So my goal now is not
the second mountain.
It's the second mountain. It's fulfillment. It's fulfillment. It's for happiness. It's for joy. It's for making other people laugh, right? So it's a different, it's a different foundation than what the other was, right? So yeah, that's new ideas excite me. Like getting in touch with my creative side excites me. Maybe looking at projects where people who are talented but maybe don't have the funds or means to do it, and then going in and helping them and giving back in that sense. That excites me as well. So yeah, and then my kids right now, I'm still in the baby bottle, right? So like their babies are like startups, right? It's 5% cute and 95% cleaning up vomit and changing diapers, right? So so that's I'm still in baby mode in that sense. So of course, seeing them grow also excites me, right? It's a completely new chapter in life, right? And they're not maybe they're chasing ice cream and cartoons, but for sure they're right here, right now, right? And that's a strong reminder.
Big masters, big teachers,
big teachers too. So yeah.
Perfect, Henrik. Thank you so much. The invitation is for the second podcast.
My pleasure.
For the class next semester.
We can take a deep dive in any of that if you like.
Oh, we have to. Now we'll have to, but we'll have time once my house is built as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'll be happy to.
Perfect.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lead Sex Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Please support us by giving us 5 stars and following us. You can continue the conversation on comments on our LinkedIn page under Leeds Adventures. See you next week.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Lead Sex Podcast is only possible thanks to our amazing team. Franz Antenheld, Alexander Ritter, Mariana Ribeiro Brazão, Julia Billick, Linus Lamar Luntz, and Nathalie Tyson. A special thanks to the team at Riverside and Jonathan Kieson.